The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing field on Kepler 442b as 12 different spacecraft settled onto the designated spots. Each ship was unique, reflecting the varied nature of the species that had come for this important meeting. The Galactic Trade Council had chosen this planet carefully for their summit because it had clean air, comfortable temperature, and beautiful wilderness that would impress all the delegates. Ambassador Vexstar stepped out of his gleaming silver vessel, his reptilian scales catching the sunlight as he surveyed the area. His species, the hegemony, always arrived first to any important gathering. It was a matter of pride in showing proper respect for diplomatic protocol. Behind him, his assistants began unloading their sophisticated habitat modules, each one designed to provide perfect climate control and security. The Zephyrian delegation emerged from their ship like graceful dancers, their translucent wings shimmering in the morning light. Their floating habitat pods were already beginning to hover above the ground, creating an impressive display of their advanced gravity manipulation technology. Captain Alwyn nodded politely to Vexstar as her people began setting up their temporary city in the sky. Dr. Clea and the scientific consortium arrived next, their massive research vessel touching down with barely a whisper. The insectoid beings moved with precise coordination as they deployed their modular research station. Everything they did was calculated and efficient, from the placement of their equipment to the exact positioning of their sleeping chambers. The crystalline collective ship looked more like a giant gem than a spacecraft, and when it opened, beings of living crystal emerged, their bodies refracting the sunlight into beautiful rainbow patterns. They immediately began growing their geometric shelters, the crystal structures rising from the ground like exotic flowers blooming in fast motion. Commander Zix and the Mechanoid Union made no attempt at subtlety, their angular black ship landing with a thunderous roar that shook the ground. The robot-like beings marched out in perfect formation, carrying sleek metallic housing units that assembled themselves with mechanical precision, one by one. The other delegations arrived and began setting up their various accommodations. The Aquatic Federation brought their biodomes filled with the blue-green atmosphere of their water world. The ethereal Vexani constructed shimmering energy barriers that seemed to bend light around them. The fungal network grew their living quarters from spores, creating organic structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Each species had brought the finest examples of their technology and culture. The temporary settlement that emerged looked like a showcase of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Climate-controlled environments, gravity manipulators, energy shields, and bioengineered habitats created a stunning display of technological achievement. Then the human ship arrived. The vessel was smaller than most of the others and looked almost primitive by comparison. It had clean lines and functional design, but none of the exotic technologies or artistic flourishes that marked the other craft. When it landed, only a single figure emerged. Jake Murphy stood about 6 feet tall with brown hair and an easy smile that seemed permanently fixed on his face. He wore simple clothes that looked practical rather than ceremonial, and he carried only a large canvas bag slung over his shoulder. While the other delegations had arrived with entourages of assistants, advisors, and security personnel, Jake appeared to be completely alone. The alien delegates watched with growing confusion as Jake walked toward the designated meeting area. They expected him to signal his ship for his accommodation module, or perhaps begin assembling some sort of human habitat system. Instead, he simply stood there, looking around at the beautiful landscape with obvious appreciation. Ambassador Vexstar was the first to approach, his diplomatic training overcoming his bewilderment. "Greetings, human representative," he said, his translator converting his hissing speech into standard galactic. "I am Ambassador Vexstar of the reptilian hegemony. Welcome to our gathering." "Hey there," Jake replied with that same easy smile. Jake Murphy, Earth Diplomatic Corps. "Beautiful place you picked for this meeting. Really nice." Vexstar nodded politely, then looked around for Jake's equipment. "Where is your accommodation module, human? I do not see your people unloading your habitat systems." Jake patted his canvas bag. "Right here, buddy. I'm going camping." The word came through the universal translators clearly, but none of the aliens understood what it meant. Vextar's scaled brow furrowed as he tried to process this information. Camping? This term is not in our cultural database. Please explain. This human concept. Oh, it's great, Jake said enthusiastically. You find a nice spot outdoors, set up a simple shelter, maybe build a fire, sleep under the stars. Very relaxing. Humans do it for fun all the time. The conversation had attracted the attention of other delegates, who began gathering around with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. Dr. Clea stepped forward, her compound eyes studying. Jake with scientific interest. You intend to sleep outside? She asked, her translator giving her voice a mechanical buzz. Without environmental controls or protection systems? Sure, Jake said cheerfully. The weather report looks great for the next few days. Should be perfect camping weather. Captain. Alwyn floated closer, her ethereal form shimmering with concern. But human, there are wild creatures on this planet. Predators. Weather changes. How will you protect yourself from these dangers? Jake shrugged. Same way humans have always done it. Use your brain. Stay alert. Work with what you have. My grandfather always said that a human with basic tools and some common sense could make a home anywhere. The aliens exchanged glances that conveyed their shared disbelief. Commander Zix processed this information through his logical circuits and announced, "This behavior appears to be deliberately primitive. Why would an advanced species choose to abandon their technological advantages?" It's not about abandoning anything, Jake explained patiently. It's about remembering where we came from, staying connected to the natural world. Plus, it's actually pretty relaxing once you get used to it. The gathering crowd of aliens began murmuring among themselves in their various languages. The concepts Jake was describing seemed completely foreign to them. Most of their species had moved beyond any need for direct interaction with natural environments millennia ago. This is concerning, whispered the fungal network representative to Dr. Clea. Perhaps the humans are not as advanced as we believed. Should we be conducting trade negotiations with such a primitive species? Jake seemed completely unaware of the diplomatic crisis his camping plans were creating. He was scanning the area, near the tree line, obviously looking for a suitable spot to set up his campsite. The other delegates watched him with a mixture of fascination and horror, as if they were observing some sort of exotic but dangerous animal. Well, Jake announced after completing his survey, I'm going to get set up before it gets dark. The meeting starts tomorrow morning, right? See you all then. With that, he walked off toward a clearing near the edge of the forest, leaving behind a group of very confused and concerned alien diplomats. The alien delegates spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on their preliminary discussions, but their attention kept drifting to the clearing where Jake Murphy was setting up his campsite. From their comfortable, climate-controlled shelters, they watched with growing fascination as the human worked with his hands to create what he called his temporary home. Dr. Clea had positioned her research equipment to get the best view of Jake's activities. Her scientific mind was completely absorbed by what she was witnessing. Remarkable, she noted into her recording device. The human appears to be engaging in deliberate resource manipulation using only basic tools and physical labor. Jake had found a level spot near a large oak-like tree and was now clearing the ground of rocks and debris. He used a small folding shovel from his pack, working methodically to create a smooth area. The aliens watched as he gathered stones from a nearby stream, arranging them in a perfect circle. When Commander Zix asked Dr. Clea what purpose this served, she could only speculate. The circular stone arrangement may serve some ritual function, she recorded. Or perhaps it is related to their primitive heating systems. The human continues to work with apparent enjoyment rather than distress. As the afternoon wore on, Jake pulled a bundle of fabric and metal poles from his pack. The aliens watched in amazement as he assembled what he explained was called a tent. The structure seemed impossibly simple compared to their advanced habitat systems. Yet it went up quickly and looked surprisingly sturdy when finished, Captain Alwyn floated. over to observe more closely, her ethereal form shimmering with curiosity. "Human Jake," she called out, "your shelter appears very minimal. Are you certain it will provide adequate protection?" Jake looked up from securing his tent stakes and grinned. "This little guy has kept me dry through thunderstorms in the Rocky Mountains. She'd do just fine here." He patted the tent wall affectionately, as if it were a trusted friend. The crystalline collective delegate tilted his geometric head in confusion. "You speak of your shelter as if it possesses consciousness. Do humans form emotional attachments to inanimate objects?" "Not exactly," Jake laughed. "But when something keeps you safe and comfortable in the wild, you tend to appreciate it. This tent and I have been through a lot together." As evening approached, the alien delegates retreated to their various shelters for their meal periods. Each species had brought sophisticated food preparation systems, molecular replicators, and nutrient synthesizers. They dined on perfectly balanced meals designed by their finest scientists to provide optimal nutrition and flavor. Jake Murphy gathered dead wood from the forest floor. The aliens watched through their viewing screens as Jake arranged the wood in his stone circle, then produced a small device from his pocket. With a simple click, flames appeared, and soon a cheerful fire was crackling in the gathering darkness. "By the 7 moons," breathed Ambassador Vexstar from his climate-controlled observation deck. "The human has created combustion without any apparent technology. How is this possible?" Commander Zix ran a detailed scan of the area around Jake's campsite. "My sensors detect only basic chemical combustion. The human appears to be using controlled burning of organic matter for heat and light generation. This is incredibly primitive, yet somehow effective." The real shock came when Jake pulled food from his pack and began cooking it over the open flames. He had brought simple ingredients that he combined and prepared using nothing but basic tools and the heat from his fire. The aliens watched in stunned silence as he made what appeared to be a complete and appetizing meal using methods their species had abandoned thousands of years ago. "The nutritional content appears adequate," Dr. Cleo reported after scanning Jake's dinner. "However, the preparation method involves significant risk of contamination and nutritional inconsistency. Why would an intelligent being choose such an unreliable food preparation system?" Jake seemed completely content as he ate his simple meal by the firelight. He had set up a small folding chair next to his tent and was relaxing as if he were in the finest luxury resort in the galaxy. When nocturnal creatures began calling from the forest, making sounds that caused several alien delegates to activate their security systems, Jake simply looked up at the stars and smiled. "Are those not predator calls?" The Aquatic Federation representative asked nervously, his biodome's defenses automatically strengthening in response to the sounds. "Probably just night birds," Jake called back cheerfully. "Maybe some small mammals. Nothing dangerous around here, according to the planetary survey." The aliens found this casual attitude toward potential threats completely baffling. Their own security protocols required constant environmental monitoring, threat assessment, and automatic defensive responses. Yet Jake sat by his fire, completely relaxed, apparently enjoying the wild sounds around him. As full darkness settled over the camp, the alien shelters lit up with various forms of artificial illumination. Energy fields glowed, crystal structures pulsed with inner light, and mechanical systems hummed with power consumption. Jake's campsite, by contrast, was lit only by his small fire and a simple battery-powered lantern. "His power consumption is almost zero," Commander Zix observed with something approaching admiration. "While our systems require constant energy input for life support, environmental control, and security, the human setup operates on minimal resources." When Jake finally retired for the night, banking his fire so it would smolder safely until morning, the aliens expected him to activate some sort of security system or at least establish communication links with his ship. Instead, he simply crawled into his tent, zipped it closed, and within minutes appeared to be sound asleep. "This is incredible," Dr. Cleo whispered to her colleagues over the communication network. "The human shows no signs of stress or concern despite being completely exposed to the environment." His vital signs, according to our scans, indicate deep relaxation rather than the heightened alertness we would expect from such a vulnerable position. The alien delegates spent most of the night awake, monitoring their various security systems and watching Jake's peaceful campsite. Every rustle in the forest, every night sound, every change in the wind sent alerts through their sophisticated monitoring equipment. Meanwhile, Jake slept soundly, apparently undisturbed by anything happening around him. Perhaps, suggested the ethereal Vexani delegate as dawn approached, this camping behavior serves some unknown survival function. The human may be demonstrating an adaptive capability that our species have lost through technological dependence. As the first light of dawn touched the clearing, Jake emerged from his tent, stretched like he had enjoyed the best night's sleep of his life, and began rebuilding his fire to prepare breakfast. The aliens, exhausted from their night of worried observation, could only stare in amazement at his obvious contentment and energy. The second day of the diplomatic summit began with Jake Murphy whistling cheerfully as he prepared his breakfast over the campfire. The alien delegates, many of whom had barely slept due to their concerns about the human safety, watched from their sophisticated shelters as Jake moved around his campsite with obvious energy and satisfaction. Ambassador Vexstar had called an early morning meeting among the delegation leaders to discuss what they had observed. The human's behavior continues to be highly irregular, he announced to the gathered representatives. Yet his physical condition appears optimal. Our medical scans show no signs of stress, fatigue, or nutritional deficiency. Dr. Clea nodded enthusiastically, her compound eyes bright with scientific curiosity. In fact, his vital signs suggest he is experiencing what humans call happiness. This camping activity appears to have positive effects on his mental and physical well-being. The morning's formal negotiations were scheduled to begin at the standard galactic time, but the alien delegates found themselves distracted by what Jake was doing at his campsite. Instead of simply maintaining his basic setup from the previous night, the human had begun making improvements and additions that fascinated his observers. Jake had awakened before dawn and spent the early morning hours gathering fallen branches from the forest floor. Using a small saw from his pack and what appeared to be strong rope, he was constructing some sort of elevated platform. The aliens watched as he measured distances with his eyes, tested the strength of each piece of wood, and fitted everything together with remarkable precision. What is he building? Captain Alwyn asked, her ethereal form floating closer to get a better view. The structure appears to serve no obvious survival function. Jake noticed the growing audience of alien observers and waved cheerfully. Morning, everyone. Just making some improvements. Camping is all about making yourself more comfortable as you go along. Commander Zix's mechanical systems whirred as he analyzed the construction. The human is creating a raised platform approximately 15 centimeters above ground level. The engineering appears sound, but the purpose remains unclear. Jake finished lashing the final support beam and tested his platform by jumping on it several times. Satisfied with its stability, he began moving his tent onto the elevated surface. Keeps you off the damp ground, he explained to his fascinated audience, warmer, drier, and more comfortable. Plus, it gives you better drainage if it rains. The concept of voluntarily improving a temporary shelter, using only available resources, was completely foreign to the aliens. Their habitats were designed by teams of engineers and constructed by automated systems to exact specifications. The idea of making modifications using nothing but ingenuity and basic tools was revolutionary to them. Dr. Clea began recording everything Jake did, noting each technique and material choice. The human demonstrates remarkable spatial reasoning and practical engineering skills, she noted. He appears to understand structural principles without any apparent computational assistance. Jake's improvements continued throughout the morning. He rebuilt his fire pit, creating a more sophisticated design with better airflow and a flat stone surface that served as a cooking area. Using wire mesh from his pack and some clever arrangements of rocks, he constructed what he called a grill that allowed him to cook food more efficiently. The human is systematically optimizing his resource utilization, Commander Zix observed, with something approaching admiration. Each modification serves multiple functions and improves overall system efficiency. The most impressive addition came when Jake began working on what he called his water system. He had identified a small stream about 50 meters from his campsite and was now creating a way to collect and filter water without making multiple trips. Using a tarp, some containers, and rope, he rigged up a collection system that funneled rainwater into storage vessels. How does he know to do these things? The fungal network representative asked Dr. Clea. Does his species possess instinctive engineering knowledge? It appears to be learned behavior combined with adaptive problem-solving, Dr. Clea replied. The human mentioned his grandfather teaching him. This suggests that camping knowledge is passed down through generations as cultural information. By midday, the formal negotiations had barely begun because the alien delegates kept requesting breaks to observe Jake's activities. His simple campsite was rapidly becoming something much more sophisticated, yet he continued to use only basic tools and materials he could find or carry. Jake had noticed his audience growing larger and more interested, so he began explaining his techniques as he worked. You see, the key to good camping is thinking ahead, he said while weaving branches together to create a windscreen. You start simple, then you improve as you go. Each little addition makes your life easier and more comfortable. The aliens peppered him with questions about every aspect of his construction. Why did he choose certain materials over others? How did he know the proper angles for drainage? What determined the optimal height for his platform? Jake answered each question patiently, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share his knowledge. My dad taught me most of this stuff when I was a kid, Jake explained as he demonstrated how to tie a particularly useful knot. He learned it from his dad, who learned it camping during military service. Humans have been doing this kind of thing for thousands of years. We just keep getting better at it. The concept of accumulated practical knowledge passed down through generations fascinated the aliens. Most of their species had long ago digitized all useful information and stored it in computer systems. The idea of learning by doing of knowledge that existed in hands and muscles rather than databases was almost incomprehensible to them. Ambassador Vexstar finally approached Jake's campsite directly, his diplomatic curiosity overcoming his initial skepticism. Human Jake, he said formally, your construction techniques are most impressive. Would you be willing to demonstrate some of these methods to our technical specialists? Sure thing, Jake replied with his usual grin. Always happy to share camping tips. Want to try tying some knots? Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty satisfying. As the afternoon wore on, the diplomatic summit transformed into an impromptu camping workshop. Alien delegates who had never touched raw materials in their lives found themselves learning to tie rope, stack stones, and understand the basic principles of shelter construction. The formal negotiations were postponed as an entire gathering of advanced galactic civilizations discovered the lost art of building things with their own hands. The third day of the summit started with perfect weather, but by mid-afternoon the planetary weather monitoring system began showing concerning data. A massive storm front was moving toward their location much faster than any of the computer models had predicted. The weather satellites showed a swirling mass of dark clouds that stretched across half the continent, bringing with it winds that could reach dangerous speeds. Ambassador Vexstar called an emergency meeting of all delegation leaders inside the main conference shelter. The holographic weather display showed wind speeds climbing toward hurricane levels, with driving rain and possible hail. The storm would arrive within hours, not the 2 days that had been originally forecast. We must consider evacuation to our ships, announced Commander Zix, his mechanical voice expressing unusual concern. The projected wind speeds exceed the safety limits of several habitat systems. Captain Elwin's ethereal form flickered with worry. Our floating pods are designed for controlled atmospheric conditions. These wind speeds could scatter our entire delegation across the continent. Dr. Clea was running calculations on her portable computer. The storm intensity readings are beyond what most of our shelters were designed to handle. We established our temporary structures expecting mild weather conditions. The alien delegates began reporting problems with their various habitat systems. The crystalline collective's geometric shelters were already showing stress fractures from the increasing wind pressure. The Aquatic Federation's biodomes were designed for underwater environments and had no defense against severe atmospheric disturbances. Even the Mechanoid Union's supposedly robust housing units were not rated for this level of weather violence. "What about the human?" asked the fungal network representative. "His primitive shelter will certainly be destroyed by such conditions." Through the conference shelter's viewing panels, they could see Jake Murphy at his campsite, apparently unconcerned by the approaching storm. Instead of seeking shelter or preparing to evacuate, he was working frantically to modify and strengthen his setup. The aliens watched in amazement as Jake moved with purpose and speed, making rapid changes to his campsite. Jake had obviously been monitoring the weather himself, because he was already implementing what appeared to be a comprehensive storm preparation plan. He was digging channels around his elevated tent platform, creating drainage systems that would direct water away from his sleeping area. Using his small shovel and some improvised tools, he carved trenches that followed the natural slope of the land. "Fascinating," Dr. Clea observed through her scanner. "The human appears to be modifying the terrain itself to control water flow. He is literally reshaping his environment to serve his needs." The wind was already beginning to pick up, but Jake continued working. He was adding additional support ropes to his tent, securing them to trees and large rocks with knots that seemed impossibly complex. Each rope was positioned at a different angle, creating a web of support that distributed stress across multiple anchor points. Ambassador Vextar activated the external communication system. "Human Jake, you must seek shelter immediately. The approaching storm will be extremely dangerous." Jake looked up from his work and waved. "Thanks for the warning, but I've got this handled. Just need to finish a few more preparations." The aliens watched in growing alarm as the storm clouds began to block out the sun, turning the afternoon as dark as evening. Jake was now working by the light of his battery-powered lantern, adding what appeared to be wind barriers around his campsite. He was using fallen logs, his tarp, and additional rope to create angled deflectors that would redirect the wind around his shelter area. "His behavior is completely irrational," declared the ethereal Vexani delegate. "No rational being would choose to face such conditions in a primitive shelter when safe alternatives are available." The first drops of rain began falling as Jake made his final preparations. He had somehow expanded his simple tarp system into a complex overhead shelter that connected his tent to a larger covered area. The structure looked like it had grown organically from the landscape, using trees, rocks, and elevated ground as natural support points. As the storm hit with full force, the alien delegates huddled in their various shelters and watched their sophisticated systems begin to fail one by one. The Zephyrian floating pods were blown off course despite their gravity controls, forcing the elegant beings to make emergency landings in unsuitable terrain. The crystalline collective's geometric structures began cracking under the pressure, their perfect symmetry no match for chaotic natural forces. Commander Zix's housing unit was holding up better than most, but even his robust mechanical systems were struggling against wind speeds that exceeded their design parameters. "Structural integrity at 60% and falling," he announced over the communication network. "These conditions are beyond acceptable safety margins." The most dramatic failure came when the ethereal Vexani-S energy shelter simply winked out of existence, overwhelmed by the electromagnetic interference from the storm. The delicate being found herself completely exposed to the driving rain and howling wind, her ethereal form flickering dangerously in the chaos. Through all of this, Jake Murphy's campsite stood firm. His tent remained securely anchored while sophisticated alien shelters collapsed around him. His drainage channels kept his area dry while water pooled around failing habitat modules. Most remarkably, his wind barriers were actually redirecting the storm's fury, creating a pocket of relative calm in the middle of nature's violence. When the Vexani delegate's shelter failed completely, Jake didn't hesitate for a second. "Hey, there," he shouted over the wind, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the storm noise. "Come on over here. There's plenty of room." The ethereal being hesitated, her form wavering in the rain, but as another gust of wind nearly dispersed her completely, she flew desperately toward Jake's sheltered area. Jake had somehow created a space under his expanded tarp system that provided protection from both wind and rain, and he welcomed the alien refugee with his usual cheerful demeanor. "No problem at all," Jake said as he helped the Vexani delegate settle into the dry space. "That's what camping is all about. Taking care of each other when things get rough." As the storm continued to rage, more alien delegates found their sophisticated shelters failing, and one by one, they began making their way through the wind and rain toward the only place that seemed to offer real protection: Jake Murphy's impossible fortress built from sticks, rope, and human determination. The storm raged through the night with a fury that none of the weather prediction systems had anticipated. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to almost nothing, while winds howled with enough force to uproot trees and send debris flying through the air like missiles. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the ground and rattled the failing alien shelters. Jake Murphy worked through the worst of it, his movements sure and confident despite the chaos around him. As each alien delegate arrived at his campsite seeking shelter from their failing habitat systems, Jake somehow found space for them and made adjustments to accommodate their different needs. What had started as a simple tent and tarp setup was rapidly evolving into something far more complex and impressive. Dr. Clea was the next to lose her shelter when her research station's power systems were overwhelmed by lightning strikes. She arrived at Jake's campsite soaked and shivering, her compound eyes wide with amazement at what she found. Jake had expanded his covered area again, using additional tarps and rope to create what could only be described as a multi-room complex. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Jake called out cheerfully over the storm noise, helping the insectoid scientist into the dry central area. "I've got a spot set up over there that should work for your species. Nice and dry, good airflow." "Commander." Zix's mechanical form appeared next, his usually perfect system sparking and malfunctioning from water damage. His housing unit had finally succumbed to the wind, leaving the robot-like being to navigate through the storm on his own power. Jake immediately guided him to a covered work area where Zix could perform emergency repairs on his damaged circuits. "How is this possible?" Commander Zix asked as his systems ran diagnostic scans of Jake's structure. "My analysis shows this shelter system is more stable than our original habitat modules, yet it was constructed entirely from basic materials." Jake was busy adjusting rope tensions and reinforcing weak points as more aliens arrived. "It's all about working with what you have and understanding how forces interact," he explained while securing a loose tarp edge. "The storm wants to push and pull everything apart, so you have to give it paths to follow that don't include your living space." Captain Elwyn arrived with 3 other Zephyrian delegates, their floating pods having been completely scattered by the wind. Their translucent forms were barely visible in the driving rain, but Jake's enhanced shelter system provided them with the stable environment they needed to maintain their ethereal cohesion. Ambassador Vextar was among the last to abandon his failing shelter, his reptilian pride finally overcome by practical necessity. When he arrived at Jake's campsite, he found what could no longer be called a simple camping setup. Jake had created distinct areas for different activities and needs, all connected by covered walkways that protected the inhabitants from the storm. "This is remarkable," Vextar admitted as Jake showed him to a sleeping area that had been specifically arranged to accommodate his species' temperature requirements. "Your primitive materials have somehow created a more effective shelter than our advanced technology." Jake had even managed to maintain his fire throughout the storm, protecting it with an ingenious windscreen system that allowed smoke to escape while keeping rain out. The central fire provided warmth and light for the growing community of refugees, and Jake continued to prepare food for anyone who was hungry. "The key is understanding the principles," Jake explained as he served hot soup to a group of grateful aliens. "Technology can fail, power systems can break down, But if you understand how things actually work, you can usually find a way to solve the problem. The Aquatic Federation delegate had been particularly challenging to accommodate since his species required a humid environment that was very different from what the others needed. Jake had rigged up a separate area using water from his collection system and some creative ventilation that maintained the proper moisture levels while still being part of the larger shelter complex. As dawn finally began to break and the storm started to weaken, the aliens looked around at what Jake had accomplished in a single night. His campsite had become a small village, with sleeping areas for 12 different species, workshops, food preparation areas, and even basic waste management systems. Everything was connected by covered pathways and organized according to principles that made sense but which none of them had ever seen before. "I must ask," said Dr. Clea as she recorded everything with her repaired equipment, "how did you learn to do all of this? This level of practical engineering seems impossible for a single individual to possess." Jake was busy taking down some of the temporary storm reinforcements now that the wind was calming down. "My grandfather was in the military, did a lot of field engineering during his service," he said while coiling rope with practiced efficiency. "My dad was a carpenter who loved backpacking. My mom was a park ranger. I grew up learning this stuff because it was just part of being human, you know? We teach it to our kids because you never know when it might come in handy." The aliens spent the morning exploring Jake's temporary fortress, trying to understand the principles behind its construction. Commander Zix ran detailed structural analyses. Dr. Clea documented every technique and material choice, and the other delegates asked endless questions about human camping traditions. "Your species possesses remarkable adaptive capabilities," observed Captain Alwyn as she watched Jake efficiently pack away equipment that was no longer needed. "This camping knowledge could revolutionize how we approach exploration and colonization." As the alien delegations prepared to return to their ships for repairs and the completion of their delayed negotiations, they carried with them a new understanding of human capabilities. The trade agreements that had been the original purpose of their gathering seemed less important than the cultural exchange they had experienced. Jake finished packing his gear with the same efficient movements he had used to set everything up, leaving barely any trace of the impressive fortress he had built. "Well, if any of you ever want to learn more about camping, you're always welcome to visit Earth," he said with his characteristic grin. "We've got some amazing national parks, and I know plenty of people who would love to show you around." As the ships lifted off from Kepler 442b, their databases now filled with detailed records of human camping techniques, word began to spread through the galactic community about the humans and their remarkable ability to create homes anywhere in the universe using nothing but ingenuity, basic tools, and an understanding of how to work with nature rather than against it.